As Michael said, I have been honored to be involved with these World War II veterans, and I'd like to tell you up front at the beginning, before I start, that some of the things I'm going to say tonight are pretty gruesome. Some of the stories I have are things that you may not want to hear. If you find yourself leaving the room, getting too uncomfortable, please leave the room. I won't be offended. Too bad if other people are offended. Leave the room and take good care of yourselves. There's no way you should have to endure this. So I want to make that perfectly clear. Secondly, there is some slang that these Marines use, and they use the word Jap for Japanese, and I will be using that terminology. I apologize if you're offended up front, but the stories are their stories and they're not my words. So I apologize if you are offended. I'm going to need water already, I can tell. Excuse me. I don't have the clicker. For thousands of years, as long as humans have inhabited the earth, there's been war and there have been warriors. For thousands of years, after wars ended, there's been peace. Often, however, peace has only been enjoyed by those who are not warriors. For thousands of years, warriors who have ensured our peace have been haunted by a trauma of which they dare not speak. It's been called many names: combat fatigue, shell shock, going Asiatic, and more recently, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. What it is not cowardice, nor is it malingering. It is definitely not a character flaw, and it is not a weakness, and it is definitely not an excuse. It is a physical adaptation to combat. In fact, if a military person does not adapt, their chances of surviving are very slim to none. It is a real physical injury, and Michael will talk more about that later. It's a physical injury to the brain, and it is a medical condition. Some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are nightmares. You'll hear some stories about that as I go along. The flashbacks is one. A person can have recurrent stressful memories. Sometimes it shows up in perceptions, maybe a smell, hallucination smell. Sights, sounds can set people off. I had a patient who had a boyfriend who hated water bottles. And this was when water bottles first came out, that people were starting to drink a lot of water. He hated them. And I asked her, was he in Vietnam? She said, yes. I said, was he a medic? She said, yes. And I said, it sounds like an IV bottle. Things like that can trigger some post-traumatic stress, some post-traumatic stress disorder experiences. Oops, sorry. Did it go back? One of the things that people can get is flashbacks, and that can be also intrusive memories. There's hypervigilance. Most of the hypervigilance is a scanning of the environment, a person avoiding thoughts, feelings, and conversations associated with the trauma. Activities, people, and places, they'll avoid that too. Sometimes people have big blanks in their memory. I've talked to many Marines that cannot remember what went on. Often people will become reclusive, and they'll have a detached or strange feeling from other people. And often they will say that they are unable to love anymore. And often there is a sense of foreboding, like a despair and a shortened future. One of the other symptoms is hyperarousal, and that comes out in sleep problems. That person has a hard time falling or staying asleep. Irritability and anger outbursts are common. Concentration problems are common. And often people have an exaggerated startle response, but you cannot see it because they've been trained not to react outside, but inside their bodies they are reacting very strongly. After you have experienced all these symptoms for a long enough time, it's a matter of course before you become depressed. And often depression can lead to suicide attempts and often, unfortunately, successes. And if depression gets bad enough, there's a very good chance you'd be psychotic. And that can come in form of hallucinations or delusions, like believing you're in the middle of the enemy's territory. There are secondary symptoms. Drug and alcohol abuse and addiction is one of them. And that's often used to medicate so you can sleep at night, or to blot out the memories, blur them, not make them so strong. And as a result of that, and often not as a result of that, but as a result of that too, family crises can occur, and the family's unaware of what this person's going through. They go through what I call a silent agreement, which I'll tell you about later. Domestic violence can occur because of the anger outbursts or alcohol and drug use. And often the family just wants the old person back. And shame can also keep, the family's shame about the person experiencing these things, bizarre behaviors, can keep a family from getting help. Now I'm going to talk about these men. You can see I smile. My father was a Marine in the Pacific Theater in World War II, and he never talked about his experiences. I knew he was proud of being a Marine. He used to march us down the road and would do your left, I can still do it. Your left, right, left, left my wife with 3 fat babies. And he thought that was just a real riot. I won't continue it because it's pretty nasty. But I knew that he loved the Corps, but he never talked about it. It left a big hole in my life. And after he died, I wrote for his military records. I shared the silent agreement with him. But after he died, I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to do something to fill this hole. There's a big part of my life missing. I wrote for his military records, and I found out what regiment he was in, what battalion, and I went on the internet and did research. And it opened floodgates. I got calls from Marines and emails and letters from generals, from privates, from all over the United States. It started me on a journey that I learned not only more about him, but how those men suffered, how my dad suffered, and how they continue to suffer to this day, 65 years after World War II. When I met these guys, though, my surprise was that they all shared this silent agreement. None of them talked, but over the years I've developed a trusting, deep relationship with them, and for some reason I could talk with them, and they could talk to me like they couldn't talk to their own kids, and I could talk to them like I couldn't talk to my own father. And these are Marines that who fought from Guadalcanal. They landed on Guadalcanal and went through Okinawa. It's the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division. Hoorah, as my father would say. Out of this whole thing, I've begun to heal, and so have they. And I owe them more than I could ever repay. When I first met these guys, they were like a good cross-cut of America. They were miners, they were farmers, salesmen, a couple of juvenile delinquents. A couple guys enlisted when they were too young, and they lied to get into the Marine Corps after Pearl Harbor. And their experience was much different than the European theater. Their experience in the Japanese theater or the Pacific theater was that they were with an enemy that would not surrender, would not. There were 10,000 Japanese on one island. There were 4 left after the Marines did what they called mopped up. It was kill or be killed.